I met Olivia when she was 5. Big brown eyes, missing front teeth, and a heart so guarded I could feel it in the way she barely looked up when I first offered her a plate of pancakes. Her mother had died 2 years earlier. Her father, Mark, was kind but grief-stricken, trying his best to raise a child while barely standing himself. And me? I was a woman in love. With a man, yes, but also with the idea of family. I never tried to replace her mother. I only tried to show her I was staying. And I did. Through every fever, every spelling test, every tearful teenage tantrum, I stayed. I sewed her prom dress. I helped her apply to colleges. I held her when her heart broke for the first time. So when Olivia got engaged and began planning her wedding, I assumed foolishly that I'd be part of it. But when the invitations went out, there was no Mother of the Bride line next to my name, no mention in the program, no speech, no dance, not even a thank you. Just a seat. Row 5. And that's when I realized, sometimes the deepest betrayal doesn't come from strangers. It comes from the very child you loved as your own. I never had children of my own, not because I didn't want them, but because life had its own ideas. 2 miscarriages, 1 surgery. A quiet clinical meeting with a doctor who gently said, "You may want to start thinking about other ways to grow your family." So when I met Mark, I wasn't looking for anything more than companionship. He was a widower, quiet around the edges, with a gentle sadness in his voice that never fully left the room. But he listened. He cooked. He looked me in the eye when I spoke. He also had a daughter, Olivia. She was 5 when I met her, small, careful, and clearly not interested in another woman trying to mother her. She had a mother already, even if she was gone, and I knew better than to try to replace that kind of grief with cheerful recipes or forced affection. Instead, I stayed in the background. I made her lunches, tied her shoes, waited outside ballet practice, and made sure her nightlight was always working. I was never Mom. She called me Elaine, and that was fine. I didn't need a title. I just wanted to be there. And over time, I was. Fully. I was the one who sat through every parent-teacher conference, the one who held her hand through orthodontist appointments, the one who stayed up sewing tiny rhinestones onto her junior prom dress until my fingers ached. I helped her pick out her college dorm bedding. I drove her 6 hours north when her heart got broken in her sophomore year, and she didn't want to cry on the phone. Every milestone, every heartbreak, every quiet in-between, I was there. I didn't count the sacrifices. I didn't need recognition. Because love, real love, doesn't keep score. At least, that's what I used to believe. Until Olivia got engaged. Until the save the date arrived, addressed to Mark and Elaine Whitaker, with no mention of parents of the bride. Until I realized the dress I helped her choose for prom had more gratitude behind it than the one she picked for her wedding. And that was when I began to feel something I had never felt with Olivia before. Uninvited. At first, I tried to explain it away. Maybe it was an oversight. Maybe Olivia was overwhelmed with planning. Maybe she simply hadn't finalized everything. Yet, I told myself all the things a mother tells herself when she's trying not to feel hurt. But the signs didn't stop. They accumulated. There were dress fittings I wasn't invited to, even though I had been the one to teach her how to hem a skirt. Cake tastings where Mark went alone. Emails about guest lists, vendor confirmations, family tables, all of them passed through Mark as if I were a distant relative, not the woman who had tucked her into bed for 15 years. One evening after dinner, I asked Mark gently, "Has Olivia said anything to you about the wedding, about my place in it?" He hesitated. That pause was louder than anything he could have said. "She's just trying to keep things simple," he replied. "She doesn't want to make anyone uncomfortable." "Anyone?" He wouldn't look at me. "Her mother's family will be there." I nodded, slowly. "And I'm in discomfort." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. No denial, just the sound of a man too afraid to stir already settled water. That night, I sat in our den and looked through a box I kept tucked beneath the coffee table. Inside were photos, Olivia's school plays, science fair ribbons, birthday candles blown. Out on lopsided cakes I baked myself. In each one, I was just out of frame. And now, even at her wedding, I'd remain there, unseen. It's a strange kind of pain, to realize you gave someone a mother's love and they received it as a convenience, not as a gift, not as a family, just a placeholder until the real spotlight came. The official invitation arrived in the mail on a Monday, heavy cardstock embossed with gold foil, tied with a satin ribbon. It was beautiful, elegant, thoughtful. Every detail had been considered, except me. It read, Mr. and Mrs. Charles Riley requests the honor of your presence at the marriage of their granddaughter, Olivia Jane Riley, to Thomas Everett Callahan. Charles and Marlene Riley, Olivia's maternal grandparents, were listed as hosts. Olivia's late mother, Susan, had been their only daughter. Mark's name was tucked inside the second line, under Father of the Bride. But there was no mention of me, no Elaine, no stepmother, no loving second mother, just a seat number in the lower right corner, row 5. I read the invitation 3 times. The air seemed to vanish from the room. After everything, after every scraped knee, after every lullaby, every exam night pep talk, this was my place? 5th row? That night, Mark found me sitting at the kitchen table, the invitation still in my hands. He knew better than to pretend everything was fine. She said she didn't want to offend her mother's memory, he offered quietly, like a child caught cheating. I didn't look up. And what am I, Mark? A memory with no place to offend? He sat down slowly. She's trying to keep the peace. I finally looked at him. At whose expense? He didn't answer. In the following weeks, I stayed quiet. I helped Mark pick out his suit. I RSVP'd yes. I even offered to arrange transportation for a few of Olivia's out-of-town friends. And all the while, I carried something in my chest that felt like grief, but heavier. Because it wasn't just the loss of a role. It was the confirmation that I had never truly had it. A week before the wedding, Olivia called. Her voice was bright, breathless. Hi, Elaine. I wanted to make sure you knew Marlene is going to help me get dressed before the ceremony, so we'll need you to be seated early. I paused. Of course. No, thank you. No pause to ask how I felt, just a tidy reminder of the boundary she had drawn. That night, I stood in front of the full-length mirror and stared at the dress I'd chosen. Soft gray, with pearl beading at the cuffs. Modest, elegant, exactly the kind of thing a mother of the bride might wear. Except I wasn't. Not in her eyes. And it was time I finally saw it, too. The night before the wedding, I sat alone in our guest room, staring out the window at the garden I had tended for over 2 decades. It was blooming now. Hydrangeas, lavender, tall white daisies swaying gently in the dark. I used to teach Olivia their names, one by one. She'd forget, and I'd remind her, again and again. That's what mothering is, I suppose. Quiet repetition, giving without demand, teaching with no guarantee of remembrance. I had spent so many years loving her the only way I knew how, patiently, completely, without keeping score. But now, I couldn't ignore the ledger that had written itself behind my ribs. I wasn't angry. That surprised me. I wasn't even bitter. I was hollow. Not because I needed a title. Not because I'd dreamed of walking her down the aisle or being in the spotlight, but because I had believed deeply that love, consistent, enduring love, earned its place. And somehow, in her eyes, it hadn't. That realization was colder than anger, quieter than resentment. It was the ache of being unnecessary. I stood and reached for the soft gray dress hanging on the back of the door. I ran my fingers over the beading, the fabric I'd chosen so carefully, so hopefully. And then I made a decision. I would attend the wedding. I would sit where I was placed. I would not cry, but I would not shrink. I would not disappear to make others more comfortable with their version of the past, because I knew who I had been in her life. Even if she chose to forget, even if she tried to rewrite it, I had shown up every day in ways that would never fit inside a wedding program, and that was something I would carry proudly. The morning of the wedding was clear and warm. Sunlight filtered through the curtains as if the day itself refused to be anything but beautiful. I rose early, showered, and pressed my dress one last time. It hung there on the door, soft gray and dignified, like armor made of grace. I ate a small breakfast alone. Mark had left early to help with seating and logistics, things I once would have done but wasn't asked to. I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt still, as if something inside me had settled quietly into place overnight. When I arrived at the venue, the usher guided me to row 5 without a glance. "Elaine Whitaker," I said softly. He nodded, checked the list, and pointed toward the row. "Right this way." The room was filled with soft music and white roses. Everything was perfect, except what wasn't. I sat alone, 2 rows behind Mark, watching as guests chatted and found their seats. I kept my hands folded, my smile steady. I would not let them see disappointment. I would not let them see grief. I would be everything Olivia had decided I was not: poised, composed, proud. When Olivia entered, the room stood. She looked radiant, truly. Her gown shimmered like starlight. Her grandfather walked her down the aisle, chin lifted, pride in every step. I watched. I didn't cry. Not because I felt nothing, but because I finally understood something. This moment wasn't about me. And that was all right, because I hadn't raised Olivia for recognition. I had raised her because she needed raising, and I had done it. When the ceremony ended, as applause broke out, I stood with everyone else. I clapped. I smiled. And when she passed my row on her way down the aisle, she met my eyes for the briefest moment. There was no apology in her gaze, no invitation, but there was something like hesitation, and I held that, just long enough to remember that what I gave her couldn't be erased by a program or a seating chart. It was sewn into the fabric of her life, whether she saw it or not. The reception was held at a glass-walled garden venue just outside the city, the kind of place meant for photographs more than people, every corner curated, every flower in place. As guests sipped champagne and waiters circled with hors d'oeuvres, I stood near a fountain, watching the sunlight bounce off the water, wondering how many other women had stood just like this, unseen in the very story they helped build. Mark found me eventually. He looked flustered, his tie slightly crooked. "She's nervous," he said, glancing toward the bride. "Nervous people usually reach for their constants," I replied without turning. "She seems to be doing just fine." He sighed. "Elaine, this day, it's complicated." I finally looked at him. "No, Mark, it's actually very simple." Before he could respond, a woman brushed past me, smiling warmly. "Are you one of the florists' team? The arrangements are stunning." I paused. Mark opened his mouth, but I held up a hand. "No," I said, softly but clearly. "I'm the woman who raised Olivia since she was 5. The guest blinked, embarrassed. "Oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't realize—" "It's quite all right," I said, offering a practiced smile. "Many people haven't realized, but I'm here all the same." She excused herself quickly. Mark shifted uncomfortably. "Elaine, don't," I said, my voice calm, but cutting. Don't ask me to keep swallowing this just because it's easier for everyone else." He looked away. Later, during dinner, I took my seat as assigned, near the back, beside extended relatives I barely knew. I watched as Marlene, Olivia's maternal grandmother, was escorted to the head table and toasted with adoration. I didn't envy her, but I envied being acknowledged. Midway through the speeches, Olivia took the microphone. Her voice was warm, practiced, poised. She thanked her grandparents, her father, her bridal party, and her new in-laws. "And lastly," she said, her eyes glistening, "to my mother in heaven, whose love shaped the woman I am today. Everything I do, I carry her with me." Applause filled the room. My chest felt hollow. I waited for something. Anything. A pause, a nod, a mention. But there was none. And then, unexpectedly, she added, "And thank you to all who came today, to our friends and our extended family. It means so much." That was it. No name, no gesture, no trace of me in her words. I excused myself quietly and stepped outside, into the cool evening air. The silence out there was sharp, clean, honest. A few minutes passed before I heard footsteps behind me. It was Olivia. She stood with her arms crossed, not angry, just hesitant. "You left," she said softly. "I did," I replied. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she added. I turned to face her. "Then why did you?" She looked down. "I didn't know how to include you without upsetting Mom's side of the family. They're sensitive about her memory. And so I became what?" I asked. "The shadow? The help?" She flinched. "I wasn't trying to replace her," I said, voice low. "I never did, but I was there, every year, every moment. I didn't ask for a title. I only hoped to be seen." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I thought it would be easier if I kept things simple." "But love," I replied, "is never simple. And neither is loyalty." Tears welled in her eyes. "I'm sorry." I nodded. "I know, but sorry. Don't rewrite what's already been said." She didn't argue. She just stood there, silent. Then, almost in a whisper, she said, "You deserved better." I did. And that was enough. Not to fix it, but to finally say it out loud. The morning after the wedding, the house was quiet. Mark had already left to help Olivia and Thomas gather leftover decorations from the venue. I stayed home, not out of protest, but because I no longer felt the need to chase what had already been withheld. I sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching early lights spread across the lawn, touching every corner of a life I had built with my own hands. Not flashy, not always noticed, but real. Mark came home around noon. He walked into the kitchen and set down a small gift bag on the table without a word. I looked at it but didn't reach for it. "She asked me to bring this to you," he said. Inside was a framed photo from the wedding. Olivia and me standing together sometime during the reception. I hadn't even realized the photo had been taken. I looked composed. She looked hesitant. Between us, the kind of space that no frame could quite disguise. There was a note folded behind the frame. I didn't know how to honor two mothers without dishonoring one. I chose the wrong silence. I can't undo that, but I hope this is a beginning. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't enough to erase anything. But it was honest. And in that, there was something to breathe in. Mark watched me, unsure. "Are you going to respond?" "I already have," I said, because I had. By showing up, by holding my seat, by not begging for the place I had already earned. I didn't need to write a letter or wait for the next family gathering to feel seen. I had made peace with what I could not control. That's the thing about love, the real kind. It doesn't disappear when it's not returned. It simply lets go. With Grace, she didn't call first, just showed up on a quiet Sunday afternoon with a small bouquet of dahlias, my favorite, though I don't remember ever telling her that. She stood on the porch for a long moment before I opened the door. Her eyes searched mine, not for permission, but for possibility. I let her in. We sat in the living room, the sun coming through the windows in soft, forgiving light. She held the flowers like they were some fragile truth she didn't know how to give. "I know it doesn't change anything," she said quietly, "but I wanted to say it in person." I nodded. "I know." She looked around the room, her gaze catching on the framed photo she'd given me. I'd placed it on the mantel. Not out of sentiment, but out of clarity. A reminder that truth has many faces, and mine was among them. "I used to think love meant keeping things neat," she said. "No conflict, no discomfort, just keeping everyone in their lanes." "And now?" I asked. She sighed. "Now I think I mistook silence for safety. I didn't say anything right away, because sometimes the quiet is where truth finally lands." "I was never trying to erase you," she added. "No," I said. "You were trying to remember someone else. I understand that." She blinked, surprised. "But what I want you to know," I continued, "is that love doesn't have to be either or. There's room for more than one mother in a heart, Olivia. Even if only one brought you into this world, the other stayed to see you through it." Her eyes filled, and she nodded slowly. We didn't cry. We didn't embrace. But we sat there, two women separated by history, joined by something harder to name. That evening, after she left, I walked out to the garden. The late summer light stretched long across the yard. The hydrangeas were full, the lavender leaning with age. I touched a bloom gently and whispered a quiet promise, not to Olivia, but to myself. I will keep speaking, not for a place at anyone's table, but because I'd finally found mine. I've come to understand that motherhood is not always honored the way it should be. It's often tucked in the shadows, behind biology and legal titles, behind photos and programs, and names on invitations. But I also know this. The love I gave Olivia was real, and that is enough. She may not have called me Mom. She may not have written my name into her wedding or offered me a toast, but I know who I was in her life. I was the steady hand behind her science projects. I was the one holding tissues after heartbreak. I was the woman up at midnight, sewing sequins on a prom dress she almost forgot to thank me for. You don't raise a child for applause. You do it because you can, because someone needs you to, because love, in its truest form, doesn't wait for credit, it simply shows up. I think that's the hardest part of invisible motherhood, not the work, not the sacrifice, but the absence of acknowledgement. And yet, even that cannot undo the truth of what was lived. Olivia may never speak about me the way she speaks of her mother, and that's all right. Her mother gave her life. I gave her the rest of it. In the end, what I carry is not resentment, but peace. Because I showed up, fully, without conditions, without reward. And if that love didn't get a spotlight at her wedding, it doesn't mean it didn't matter. It just means it was never meant to be performed. It was meant to be given. And I gave it without hesitation. And I still would. Sometimes, the love we give never finds its way back to us in the form we hoped for. It doesn't always come with gratitude. It doesn't always echo. But that doesn't make it less real. There's a particular ache that comes from being almost family, present for everything, yet quietly excluded from the story once the spotlight arrives. For years, I told myself that love alone would be enough. And in many ways, it was. But I've also learned that love deserves dignity. Even if no one claps for it. Even if no one writes it into the program. My role in Olivia's life may not have made it into her ceremony, but it is stitched into her story, whether she admits it or not. She walks through the world shaped, in part, by the quiet strength I offered, the stability, the listening, the staying. There is power in knowing that. I don't need the title of mother to know I mothered. I don't need applause to know I gave love. And I don't need permission to feel proud of the woman I was, and still am. So I've stopped shrinking. I don't linger on what I wasn't given. I rest in what I gave. Because at the end of a life, it's not the thank yous that carry you forward. It's the moments no one saw, the sacrifices no one praised, and the decision to love anyway. I will never regret the years I poured into Olivia, and I will never again mistake being quiet for being small, because I wasn't small. I was everything she needed, even if she never said so. If this story touched something in you, if you've ever loved in silence, stayed in the background, or been overlooked for the love you gave, know this. Your worth is not defined by recognition. It's defined by the truth of what you gave. For more stories like this, about quiet strength, unseen sacrifices, and women who rise with dignity, follow this channel. Share this video with someone who needs to hear they were never invisible. Because real love doesn't always get honored out loud, but it always leaves a mark, and you were never forgotten.